It is one of the strangest paradoxes of modern civilization. We live in an era where information moves at the speed of light, yet clarity seems to be slipping through our fingers. We've sequenced the human genome, sent probes beyond the solar system, and taught machines to mimic human reasoning. And still many walk through life carrying a quiet dissonance, like a mathematically perfect melody that somehow fails to move the soul, as if beneath the hum of data, the universe is whispering but we've forgotten how to hear. Perhaps you've felt it too, a subtle reorientation of your perception. Not a change in the world itself, but in how the world feels. Like reality is being tuned ever so slightly, as if some deeper frequency is bleeding through the noise. Maybe it's in the repetition of numbers, or a heightened sensitivity to the energy in a room. Maybe it's in the discomfort you now feel in places that once felt normal. If that resonates, you are not malfunctioning. You may be experiencing something that's less supernatural and more perceptual. Because when a pattern arises not in one person, but across millions of unrelated lives of scientists, doesn't dismiss it. We investigate. We ask, what if consciousness is not static, but evolving? What if, like matter and energy before it, awareness itself is undergoing a phase transition? In recent decades, a curious phenomenon has surfaced not in physics, labs, or astronomical data, but in the inner worlds of countless individuals. Across cultures and continents, people describe similar experiences. A growing sense that their old ways of thinking no longer fit, that time feels strangely elastic, that emotional resonance, not logic, is becoming the compass for their decisions. Skeptics may call it coincidence. But scientists, if they're honest, know better than to ignore recurring patterns. Dolores Cannon, a researcher who spent decades documenting altered states of consciousness through deep hypnotic regression, recorded thousands of cases where subjects described not only vivid inner journeys, but remarkably similar transformational themes often, without having met or shared prior beliefs. While her methodology falls outside traditional peer-reviewed science, her data set is vast, and therein lies the intrigue. Because when unconnected individuals start describing the same internal architecture Fs in perception, sensations of energy, flashes of unfamiliar memory, it suggests something worth examining. Could these reports be early signals of a deeper systemic change? In the language of biology, we might call it pre-adaptation. In physics, perhaps a form of resonance alignment. The point is not to validate every story's literal truth, but to consider what these stories in aggregate might indicate that consciousness itself may be approaching a kind of critical threshold, not imposed by culture or creed, but emergent from the system-like magnetism appearing when atoms spontaneously align. This isn't about magical awakenings or escaping the world. It's about a perceptual upgrade. The possibility that a segment of the population is becoming more attuned to a subtle underlying ordera, new layer of signal beneath the static of modern life. And like any phase transition in nature, it doesn't happen uniformly. Some feel it early, others never do. But the early indicators, the intuitive leaps, the discomfort with shallow norms, the heightened pattern recognition could be what physicists call precursors to symmetry breaking. In other words, the signs of a system preparing to evolve. Let's pause here and be clear. The planet beneath your feet hasn't relocated. The chemical composition of Earth's atmosphere hasn't shifted overnight. But what if the transformation people describe isn't geological but perceptual? Across history, humanity has gone through cognitive revolutions. We once believed Earth was the center of the universe. We now understand it as a speck orbiting a modest star in an unremarkable galaxy, itself adrift in a vast cosmic sea. That shift didn't require the Earth to move, but for us to see differently. So when people speak of a new Earth, perhaps they are not imagining a new world, but attuning to a new way of seeing this one. In the language of physics, think of frequency. Two people can stand in the same room, hear the same sounds, but one is tuned to noise, the other to music. It's not that the environment has changed, it's that their receivers have. Just like a radio only picks up the frequencies it's designed to detect, human consciousness may only perceive the reality it's attuned to. And if something is changing not outside, but within that tuning apparatus, then a different experience of reality emerges. What once seemed chaotic may now reveal hidden symmetry. What once felt mundane may now pulse with pattern. We see this in nature all the time. A caterpillar and a butterfly exist in the same ecosystem, but their perception, their function, their experience of that ecosystem could not be more different. The world doesn't change. The organism does. Perhaps what's being described as the new Earth is, in fact, the same Earth viewed through a consciousness that has undergone metamorphosis. And if that's true, then the shift is not somewhere you go, it's something you become. There comes a point where logic, our most trusted cognitive tool, begins to strain under the weight of experience. We've built our civilization on reason, formulas, and empirical validation. Yet, even the most advanced systems, from neural networks to particle accelerators, run into uncertainty. Take quantum mechanics. The most precise scientific theory in human history doesn't describe certainties, but probabilities. It accepts, even demands, a universe where some things cannot be known until they are observed. And maybe that's not a flaw of the system, but a feature of consciousness itself, because while logic organizes what we already understand, intuition hints at what lies beyond. That quiet knowing, the sense that something is true long before the evidence arrives, may not be irrational. It may be pre-rational, a recognition system embedded deep within the neural architecture, trained not just by one lifetime, but by millennia of pattern recognition. Neuroscientists have begun mapping this. The brain doesn't always wait for step-by-step reasoning. It leaps, it synthesizes, it compresses complexity into gut-level clarity. Like gravitational lensing, where light curves around massive objects to reveal galaxies otherwise hidden, intuition might be how consciousness curves around complexity to perceive meaning that logic alone cannot catch. We trust invisible forces all the time. Gravity, electromagnetism, even dark matter, which we infer from its gravitational effects, though we've never directly observed it. So why not give the same humility to intuition, not as superstition, but as an early warning system of perception, not anti-science, but beyond the current reach of science. And if you've ever had that inner pull of decision that made no logical sense but proved correct, in hindsight, you felt this in action. That wasn't magic, it was legacy. The unfolding of cognition at a higher resolution than conscious thought. In the scientific world, we measure many things mass: energy, velocity, entropy. But there is no standard unit for meaning. Yet paradoxically, it may be the most fundamental driver of human behavior. Meaning isn't a mystical abstraction. It is a pattern recognition processor, mind's attempt to link the internal with the external, the subjective with the systemic. When people say something makes sense, what they're really describing is resonance between experience and expectation, between what is and what feels aligned. In physics, we call this coherenza state, where oscillating systems begin to synchronize. In human terms, it's the alignment between thought, action, and purpose. And when that alignment is present, something extraordinary happens. We stop reacting and begin responding. We stop chasing external validation and start tracking internal vectors of significance. This isn't just emotional wellness, it's cognitive efficiency. Systems, whether neural or astronomical, evolve toward higher order, not through force, but through resonance. Galaxies form not by accident, but by gravitational balance. Consciousness, too, may self-organize when enough nodes people begin to orient around deeper values rather than surface noise. So, when you feel a growing disinterest in competition for status, and a growing hunger for authenticity, when fear feels brittle and presence feels magnetic, that's not delusion. It may be a sign that your internal metrics have changed. That meaning, not momentum, has become your compass. And meaning, unlike profit or control, is scalable. It doesn't extract, it expands. It is the only known currency that increases in value the more it's shared. As your perception begins to recalibrate, you may notice peculiar things. Numbers repeat. Conversations arrive exactly when needed. You meet people whose presence feels scripted us. If you've rehearsed these moments in a timeline, you can't consciously access. Many call this synchronicity. In mystical traditions, it's seen as divine timing. But in science, there's a term for such phenomena, emergent coherence. In complex systems, be it an ant colony, a planetary orbit, or the firing of neurons, there comes a tipping point where disorder gives way to spontaneous structure. Without central control, order arises. Patterns emerge, and the whole becomes greater than the sum of its parts. This isn't mysticism. It's mathematics. Human consciousness may operate under similar principles. When enough subtle adjustments happen emotionally, cognitively, behaviorally, a kind of psychological coherence begins to form. Your attention becomes more refined, your pattern detection system grows more sensitive, and the apparent coincidences may simply be your expanded awareness syncing with the underlying architecture of reality and architecture that was always there, now simply within perceptual reach. Think of it like tuning an instrument. When one string hits the right frequency, others nearby may vibrate in sympathino contact required. It's called resonance. And it happens not just in music, but in nature, in electromagnetic fields, even in the way galaxies align across millions of light years. So when your experiences begin to line up, not just in content, but in timing and emotional gravity, consider this. It may not be reality that changed. It may be you finely tuned to perceive the rhythm behind the randomness. And in that state of emergent alignment, life ceases to feel like a sequence of isolated events. It begins to feel like a system, a dynamic, interconnected field of possibility, responding to your presence within it. What people often describe as ascending or crossing into the new earth might sound, at first glance, like spiritual metaphor. But from a scientific perspective, there's a more grounded framework through which to interpret this shift. Resonant transformation within a dynamic system. In physics, when a tuning fork vibrates at a certain frequency, it can cause another fork nearby perfectly silento begin vibrating in sympathy. No contact is necessary. The energy is transferred through the air, through space, via frequency alone. This is resonance. And it's not magical, it's measurable. Now consider this. Human beings are not static objects. We are electromagnetic systems. Your brain, your heart, even your cells emit frequency signatures. Your nervous system is constantly processing fields electric, magnetic, emotional. And when your internal state begins to stabilize around coherence, when your thoughts, emotions, and intentions stop contradicting each other, you become like that tuning fork. You emit a clear signal, and that signal changes your experience of reality. It's not that the Earth itself has transformed into a different planet. It's that your perception, guided by a different energetic baseline, begins to pick up on a different layer of the same reality. What once felt loud now seems hollow. What once felt normal now feels incompatible. What once seemed invisible subtle harmony, deeper patterns becomes perceptible. In other words, the new Earth isn't elsewhere. It's overlaid a frequency band nested within the existing world, like radio stations sharing the same airspace. Most people remain tuned to static. But when your internal circuitry shifts through intentional living, emotional clarity, and perceptual refinement, you begin to dial into a different broadcast. And that's not spiritual escapism, that's systems theory. When the observer's state changes, so does the observed outcome. The double-slit experiment in quantum mechanics taught us this decades ago. The mere act of observation alters reality. So if consciousness itself becomes more coherent, more intentional, it may begin to participate in reality, not just passively, but generatively. This is not fantasy, it's field dynamics. And the new Earth may be less a destination and more a frequency match, a phase of coherence that emerges when enough individuals resonate with deeper order rather than surface noise. As your inner architecture shifts cognitively, emotionally, neurologically, you may notice something strange. Time no longer feels linear. Events blur, patterns loop. You anticipate moments before they happen and recall things you never consciously learned. To some, this feels mystical, but to a neuroscientist or physicist, it raises familiar concepts: neuroplasticity, quantum non-locality, temporal perception. Let's begin with the brain. Neuroscience has shown us that the human brain is not a fixed machine, it's a self-rewiring network. Each experience, each choice, sculpts its architecture. As your values change, so do your neural pathways. Old reflexes lose power. New associations take hold. Over time, this rewiring doesn't just affect what you think, it alters how you perceive. Now add the element of time. Einstein taught us that time is not absolute. It bends. It stretches. In the presence of mass or speed, it warps. The past and future aren't fixed points. They're part of a unified continuum we call space-time. Most people experience time sequentially, like a train moving through stations. But what if, under certain states of consciousness, your perception can step off the train and observe the tracks from above? Perhaps your premonitions aren't fantasies, but glimmers of a nonlinear system glimpsed through an expanded frame. Perhaps memory itself isn't confined to the past, but is a broader Foucaultian interface with a dynamic field of experience we call the present. This isn't superstition, it's plausible neurophysics. The more coherent your internal state becomes, the more sensitive you are to subtle cues. Your brain begins to process not just sensory data, but energetic information shifts in tone, field, timing. And because the system is dynamic, not fixed, your consciousness begins to function more like a field reader than a logic gate. You're not broken, you're evolving. And the disorientation you feel, the instability of old habits, the collapse of outdated goals, isn't regression, it's reconfiguration. Like a computer upgrading its operating system, there is a temporary period of chaos. But once stabilized, your awareness begins to operate at a higher resolution, less reactive, more perceptive, less linear, more integrated. And that is the foundation not just of personal transformation, but of species-level adaptation, a new way of being human that is less about domination and more about alignment. Healing is often misunderstood. We speak of it as if we're repairing a broken machine, identifying the malfunction, replacing parts, returning to normal. But living systems don't operate like static hardware. They adapt, they evolve, and more importantly, they remember. In biology, healing isn't the restoration of perfection, it's the reestablishment of homeostasis, a dynamic balance that adjusts in real time to stress, change, and disruption. Wounds don't return tissue to its original form. They prompt the body to reorganize around new stability. So too with consciousness. What we call emotional healing may be less about erasing pain and more about reintegration. Not forgetting what happened, but recognizing that beneath the trauma, beneath the social conditioning, beneath the inherited survival patterns, there exists a deeper layer of coherence that was never lost, only obscured. This isn't philosophy, it's systemic recovery. Even in physics, systems displaced from equilibrium will, if undisturbed, eventually return to a state of lower potential energy, what we call rest. Not because they are fixed, but because the universe favors balance. High tension seeks release. Entropy increases until new order emerges. Now, consider your anxiety, your doubt, your internal dissonance not as personal defects, but as energetic displacements. The aftermath of generations of evolutionary pressure, cultural programming, and inherited survival strategies. Your nervous system didn't invent fear, it inherited it. Healing, then, becomes a form of entropic reorganization. You don't restore the old self, you integrate the scattered energy of experience into something more resilient, more aware, more internally consistent. And like any self-correcting system, the intelligence to do this isn't taught, it's uncovered. Which is why healing often feels like remembering, like discovering a pattern you always knew, but forgot under the noise. So when you begin choosing stillness over reaction, curiosity over self-judgment, coherence over chaos, you're not just being mindful, you're participating in the natural physics of reintegration. You're collapsing the waveforms of confusion and establishing new probability structure zones that favor clarity, compassion, and internal gravity. Because at the core, healing isn't the opposite of wounding. It's the emergence of a deeper structure of wholeness that was there all along in a universe governed by fields, gravitational, electromagnetic, quantum concept of separation is more illusion than fact. Objects may appear isolated, but at the energetic level, everything is embedded in a web of influence. In physics, we understand that when one node in a field changes state, the entire field adjusts, however, subtly. It's called non-local interaction. And while still debated in its more exotic forms, we've seen hints of it in entangled particles and coherent oscillators. One adjustment shifts the baseline for the entire system. Now translate that to human consciousness. When a person chooses to act with integrity, when they respond to pain with compassion or chaos with clarity, they're not just improving their own experience, they're altering the informational field around them. Their emotional coherence becomes a stabilizing frequency, detectable if not by the five senses, then by the nervous systems of those nearby. It's not metaphor, it's physics of presence. Just as a star bends the space-time fabric around it, a centered consciousness curves the emotional field it inhabits. People feel it, often without knowing why. Conversations deepen, conflicts soften, disconnection shrinks. This is why healing matters. Not just for the individual, but for the network. Your coherence makes coherence more accessible for others. Your groundedness creates permission for others to breathe more slowly. And your refusal to collapse under fear sends a subtle signal: stability is possible. In systems theory, this is called attractor dynamics. As more elements in a network shift toward a stable pattern, others begin to entrain not by coercion, but by resonance. It's how birds flock, how neurons synchronize, how cultural tipping points emerge, not by argument, but by alignment. So when you forgive, you're not just letting go, you're recalibrating the local field. When you love deeply and without transaction, you become a kind of gravitational center pulling others gently into a higher orbit. The old paradigm said, change the world through force. The emerging science and your own experience suggests something else. Change the field and the system reorganizes itself. As your perception deepens, another threshold quietly approaches own, not marked by fireworks or enlightenment, but by a subtle shift in identity. You begin to sense that the boundary between you and everything else is more porous than once believed. You start to recognize your thoughts are not isolated events. They're perturbations in a field ripples in a shared medium of awareness. This is not mysticism. It is physics if not yet fully understood, then increasingly intuited. In cosmology, we know that all matter, all energy, all structure emerged from a singular origin, the Big Bang. Every atom in your body was once fused in the heart of a star, and before that, encoded in a quantum seed of pure potential. You are not separate from the cosmos. You are its continuation on a localized expression of universal forces shaped by time, chemistry, and choice. And now, consciousness may be reaching its own evolutionary inflection point. For most of human history, our awareness has been shaped by division: self versus other, tribe versus world, mind versus body. It helped us survive. But now, as systems become more interconnected socially, ecologically, digitally, that model begins to falter. The separation that once gave us strength now creates fragmentation. And fragmentation, if left unchecked, leads to collapse. But systems don't collapse when they evolve. In complex adaptive systems, evolution isn't linear at leaps. New layers of organization arise when enough internal pressure builds. In biology, it gave us multicellular organisms. In cognition, it gave us language. And perhaps now, it is giving us interbeing, a form of identity, not based on isolation, but integration. Unity consciousness is not the loss of individuality. It's the realization that your individuality is not threatened by interconnectedness, but completed by it. Like a cell in a body or a star in a galaxy, you are unique because you belong to something vast. This doesn't negate your boundaries. it redefines their purpose. You're not here to dissolve into the cosmos. You're here to participate in its unfolding as a conscious, coherent, and curious node in a much larger field. And from that vantage point, conflict looks different. Competition loses appeal. Certainty gives way to awe, because you begin to realize the universe isn't a place you walk through. It's a process you're part of. You are not just in the cosmos. The cosmos is in you thinking, feeling, evolving through your very awareness. The moment you recognize that consciousness is not confined to your skull, that it echoes, influences, and participates in larger systems, you're met with a quiet but profound responsibility. Because from that point forward, how you live becomes more than personal. In field physics, when a single oscillator in a chaotic system stabilizes, it doesn't just maintain its own rhythm. It starts pulling others into phase. One coherent signal can shift the behavior of the entire network, not by force, but by presence. This is not romantic idealism. It's emergent dynamics. So when you, one person in a population of billions, choose to respond with awareness instead of instinct, with patience instead of reaction, with truth instead of posturing, you become more than a data point. You become an attractor, a stabilizing node in the planetary nervous system. Your integrity shifts local probabilities. Your choices ripple through conversations, through relationships, through generations. The science of influence is not limited to politics or media. It is biological. It is social. It is quantum. Every time you pause, realign, and act with intention, you collapse one path of reality in favor of another. A more ordered one, a more humane one, a more intelligent one. And that, perhaps, is what this moment on Earth demands. Not more consumption, not more noise, not more dominance, but more coherence. You are not here to save the world. The world is not broken, it's dynamic. And you are part of its feedback loop. So the question becomes, what kind of signal are you contributing to the system? Are you amplifying confusion or clarity? Reactivity or response? Entropy or structure? The universe doesn't demand perfection, it requires participation. And now, more than ever, what it needs are people whose presence radiates stability, not because they have all the answers, but because they've aligned with something deeper than opinion. People whose calm is not apathy, but gravitational. Whose attention is not distracted, but deliberate. People who understand that to live consciously is not a luxury, it's an evolutionary function. Because in every era of cosmic transformation, a new kind of signal emerges, not louder, but clearer. Not larger, but more precise. And maybe, just maybe, that signal is you.